Chapter 1. Terror in the Auditorium.
Ladies and gentlemen,
the deep rumbling voice carried across the auditorium with the bad mic quality expected with conventions.
Cyborgs and androids, welcome to the big one, BushidoCon 2018, 25 years, proving we really are forever vigilant.
The speaker was a man clearly trying to resist the big 6-0 that time was inevitably hurtling him towards. Tall and on the heavy side, with the spectacles of someone who did too much reading in poor light, and teeth permanently stained by too many cigars.
Our guest of honor here needs no introduction, but I'll take any gig I can get. The mechanical maestro, the cybernetic scholar, the one, the only, Danny Stipowicz.
The crowd roared as a much smaller middle-aged man, thin and wearing a sharp suit coat that contrasted the blue jeans and running shoes he wore, stepped out from behind the curtain and raised an arm in greeting. To an objective observer, it would be seen as the kind of mandatory gesture one gives upon spotting someone you didn't expect to meet and aren't thrilled at the surprise. But the crowd was far too excited to notice what Danny was doing.
Thank you,
he said when he got to his mic.
Thanks, it's great to be here. 25 years, wow. And it doesn't feel a day over 30.
They laughed, not spotting the streak of devilish honesty in the remark. The room was filled to capacity with fans of BushidoBots, the 90s toy and comic that had touched all their lives in one way or another. Enough to be here for this special event, and to hear from the man himself some of the stories of those times, as exchanged with the comic's editor-in-chief, generally referred to only by his last name, Copper. I was brought on board directly out of college, Danny explained in answer to a question about his history with the series. I'd submitted some samples of my work and it was good enough to be given a chance to write comics, which for any 22-year-old was a dream. And it was Copper here who gave me BushidoBots there. Well, I had no doubt. I read what you had submitted and thought, this guy was made for this prospect. This is right in his wheelhouse. And with Dallas there to get you through any rough spots, I was sure it was going to be a perfect match. I had no idea it was going to be this big of a success, though. And if you'd seen this little punk back then, you wouldn't have either. But he exceeded even my high expectations, and of course, we wouldn't be here today if he hadn't. The crowd applauded in appreciation. Thank you, Danny said. Turning the toys into a race of cyborg warriors, that was you. All the background material. There wasn't even a Dawny Matrix in the original information you got from Prism, right? No, I had to create pretty much everything out of whole cloth, Danny explained. The toys didn't even have names, unless you wanted to count Sword Girl, of course. A big part of my job was to build a world around the toys, and it took a lot of late nights and a few wastebaskets full of ideas, but it gradually took shape. So you took this action figure called Sword Girl and shaped her into the Yoko that we all know and love. Yeah, it felt like she needed to be a leader, but at the same time she was too much of a warrior to be in command. Yoko knows restraint, but she sees injustice and she wants to act. She needs to act. You need somebody like Hero to say, wait a minute, this might call for some other strategy. But once the decision was made to fight, there's no one you want more than her to lead the charge. I think we have time for a few more questions, Copper said to the audience. Next? The next fan stepped up to the mic. A younger member of the audience. He was wearing his college's jersey and probably was still attending. Since you bring up Yoko, what's the story behind New Haircut exactly? Both of the men on stage laughed at the mention. That was an editorial decision. I think editorial mop-up would be more accurate, Copper added. Exactly. This started because there was a disagreement over, shall we say, artistic sensibilities. By which you mean breasts? By which I mean breasts, yes. Danny laughed. Terry was from the school of art that the stronger the woman, the more that would manifest itself in a particular way. And so with Yoko being the leader of Katanatron, she should be able to knock things over before she even entered the room. Nails, who saw Yoko as a feminist icon, Copper interrupted at this point. This is Sonia Klein, who took over as inker when Paul left, right? Yeah, everyone around the office called her Nails, because of all the designs that she did on the fingernails of her left hand, see. But she and Terry were both a dream team, and a nightmare at the same time. I worked with a lot of talented people on that book, but his artwork was stunning stuff. And then Nails would take those pencils and just add that little twist. I mean, they were an amazing team. Issue 14 made the 50 greatest covers of the 90s. It was iconic. It was our Superman smashing the car, Danny admitted. Our Joker with a camera. Those two were incredible together. Which is amazing because they bickered over every little thing. So, what happened with Yoko? Oh yeah, so Sonia would tell Terry to stop objectifying Yoko, and Terry would put Yoko in these poses just to annoy her. And Dallas would tell him, we're not making that kind of book. So one issue comes along, and it's a big splash page. And Terry gave Yoko these physics-defying assets. I mean, just absolutely ridiculous. It was the kind of thing that would make Frank Cho tell you to maybe dial it back a little. Well, it was the 90s, Copper admitted. Well, that doesn't mean you have to try to out-Liefeld. Copper laughed at the thought of that. It would be easier to win the staring contest with the sun. So Dallas, Danny continued, told Terry that they had to be fixed. So the day before he leaves for Comic-Con, Terry fixes Yoko by adding jiggle lines. Then he turns it in and leaves. So he's gone. And this is 1994, so he doesn't even own a cell phone. No way to get in touch with him. Nails is so fed up by now, she erases and redraws them herself, what she thinks would be appropriate. Something that an actual human being might have. Something that wasn't built in a pervert mad scientist lab. And then she inks them. When Terry spots them, he has a conniption that his art was altered without his permission. Sonia responds by calling him a pig and worse, and Dallas, of course, is left to sort it all out. For better or worse, the character doesn't look the same as Terry would normally draw her. But when he learns that Terry ignored him, Dallas not only doesn't change anything, he actually goes in and adds the line, "You look different. New haircut?" And Yoko says, "I don't want to talk about it." The audience laughed, most already knowing the punchline to this story, but enjoying hearing it from Danny himself. "Next question?" Copper asked. There were frequently people who stepped up in costume, but the next fan was unique. She had what were clearly prescription eyeglasses, but the frames had been modified to evoke the design style of Donny Matrix concept art, and the Katanatron symbol etched into the bridge of them. It was clear these were not part of a costume. This was her normal attire. "Hi," she said. "I've been a fan since issue number 3. Forever vigilant." "Thank you," Danny replied. "I have a question about the live-action movie, and why you didn't try to get them to fix all the terrible things?" Copper spoke up at this point. "All the terrible things in that film is more than any one man could ever hope to fix. I think we can all agree on that." The crowd chuckled at the remark. Danny continued. "I wasn't involved in the film. There was some back and forth with my agent early on, but ultimately the producers and the studio wanted to make their own kind of film." "But you wrote the book of the movie, so you were involved." "I wrote the novelization," Danny explained, "but that was based upon the script the studio sent me. I had no contact with the creative forces on the film." "Using the term creative loosely," Copper added. "Exactly," Danny continued. "So there was nothing I could really do except try to turn the script they gave me into something that conformed to what we all know of as BushidoBots." She was silent for a moment, but she didn't move away. "There was something you could do. You could have told them you wouldn't write it, that you wouldn't have anything to do with something that failed so badly at it. But instead you sold out." There was an uncomfortable silence in the room until Copper finally filled it. That's a bit harsh. Writers usually don't have the luxury to turn down a project. All you can do is what Danny did, which is to try to save the soul of the work. And I think any of us who read the novelization will say, given what he had to work with, he did a hell of a great job making a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Am I right, everyone? The crowd joined in with the applause. "If I may," Copper continued, "what would you say was the hardest part about doing the novelization?" "Not committing seppuku myself," Danny said. The audience laughed at the joke. He continued, struggling a bit. finding a way to explain that in the movie they're androids when they're supposed to be cyborgs. That was a rather fundamental failure on their part, presuming that the name means that they were robots, even though the mythology is all about cyborgs. That was a rather basic screw-up. That was a challenge to square away. So you introduced the subplot about the cerebro bug that caused them all to think they were androids, Copper said. Yeah, Danny said with a nod of his head. It wasn't perfect, but it let me try to fix it up. Another fan stepped up to the mic. This one not only had a BushidoBots baseball cap on, but the child in the sling in front of him was also sporting a matching cap. He spoke into the mic. Hi, I just wanted to know about the rumors about the animated series they announced this morning. Some said that you were going to be involved? Copper turned to Danny. Is the Master returning to the city of Dawn and Matrix? An expectant hush came over the crowd. I'm afraid that I can't, Danny said, followed by a sound of disappointment from the crowd. I have a project right now that has my full attention, and if I do BushidoBots, I want to be able to give it the time and effort that it deserves. You've crushed many hearts today, Copper said. I'm sorry. What's the next project? Copper asked. I've written a play. It's a Prohibition-era reinterpretation of Don Quixote. Interesting, Copper said. And how high exactly were you when you came up with this mashup? The audience laughed. I'm kidding. Knowing your talents, I'm sure it'll be fantastic. I hope so, Danny said. Hector Keats is already on board. He loved it. He's going to be playing the main role, and he's going to executive produce, so it's pretty exciting. No chance of cyborgs, then? Copper asked. Highly unlikely. I'm sure we're all going to wish you the absolute biggest success possible with this. Thank you for your time. We're all looking forward to your story on Sunday. Danny Stipowicz, everyone! The crowd erupted in applause as he stood up and waved to them and stepped behind the curtain.